Oops.
All right. Well, welcome to another session of the Neighborhood Bird Project Birds. And today we're going to be looking at flycatchers and miscellaneous land birds. So we're in for a heavy lift here because the flycatchers can be a little bit difficult, and we're going to cover a lot of ground. But I think we're going to have a lot of fun too. So here I'm going to share the screen. And we're going to start with the flycatchers and kingbirds. All right, so we'll start with our first bird here. So this is a western kingbird. It does not breed in our parks or anything, but you'll get this bird in the spring and sometimes in the fall. Uh, and let's look at the field mark. So it's got what we call a utility bill here. So it's kind of like a crow-like bill, I guess you could say, dark. Uh-oh, I don't know what happened with that. Very pale gray head with a little bit of an eye line that goes from the lores to the back of the eye. Very pale underneath the chin and so on. So it's like a hood effect of pale gray. A little bit of pale gray on the chest here, and then this intense yellow on the underparts all the way back to where the undertail coverts start. The back is kind of a nondescript grayish, yellowish, I guess you could say, and then the wings are pretty plain. So here's what it looks like from the front. You can see, like all flycatchers, they have bristles on above their bills there. It's thought that somehow that might help them sense flying insects because that's the way they make their living. They come out from a perch and catch a fly and then come back. But you can see here this very beautiful pale gray all the way down to the chest here, and then the yellow starts on the belly and goes all the way back to the undertail coverts, which are kind of whitish and sort of sometimes washed with yellow. So a very distinct bird. There's the only other bird that you would confuse this with at all would be a tropical kingbird, which is a tropical bird but comes to visit us in the wintertime, usually in November, December, or sometimes January. And these western kingbirds are not like that. They are definitely neotropical birds that come to us to breed in the spring and summer. So the overlap on these two birds is not very much, if any, unless we get a stray western kingbird. And I don't know of any records of that, although there probably are some, but we don't have to really worry about that. So western kingbird, they breed in eastern Washington, so they're not going to spend a whole lot of time with us, but we get them on the west side every year. Here's another side view of one. You can see the color of the wings is a little bit different from the back. And here's the back can look very plain. You get this a little bit of a color break from the hood of the gray to a sort of a brownish, greenish, yellowish on the back, and then the tail is dark. Isn't that beautiful? Look at that in flight. Wow. So here you have the gray, and you can see all the way down to the chest, this bright yellow underparts here, and then it kind of fades off to a sort of whitish yellowish on the undertail coverts. There's a very narrow outer white on the outermost tail feather, but that's hard to see in the field. So a western kingbird. The males, if they feel like it, can part their head feathers and show a little dot of red, but that's hard to see in the field. And I'm trying to think if I ever saw that. I've seen it in eastern Washington where they breed, but I don't believe I've ever seen one here in western Washington do that. Here's what the back looks like, and you can see that very narrow bit of white on the dark, very dark tail, almost a black tail. Very plain wings otherwise. Western kingbird. All right. So here's now we're going to get to a common phoebe. So this is Say's phoebe. Say's phoebe is another neotropical migrant. It's an early migrant. We get them usually in late March or so, sometimes even a little bit earlier than that. But they have a very long, extended spring migration. So you'll get some of these migrants in spring, clear through till mid-May or so sometimes. So they're kind of individualistic in that way. That's unusual for most migrants. Most migrants, the window of spring migration is pretty narrow. That's not true in the fall migration. With most of these neotropical migrants, the window of migration in the fall is much longer. Not That's not true for every species, but it's pretty common. But the Say's phoebes are a little bit different. They can come over the stretch of more than a month and a half or so. Um, but the best time to see them is in early April, I'd say. This picture was taken at Montlake Phil, and you can see, so it's got a very plain, sort of grayish brownish head, a little bit of a mask, and then very pale grayish on the breast and chin, and then this beautiful chestnut color from the belly on back to the undertail coverage. That is diagnostic. So it's like the bird is divided in half. The top half of or I should say the front half of the bird is a sort of beigey, browny, grayy, and then the back half of the bird, at least on the underparts, is this rich kind of reddish chestnut color. Oftentimes, these Say's phoebes they'll raise up their little head feathers and look kind of cresty, but that's not always true. You can see here this one's got a very flat, round head, so that's not a good field mark. Just a hint of a mask there, also not a very good field mark. The best field mark is this sort of divided half of bird on the front half, this plain grayish, and then going to the darker part of the head, and then below that is this rich chestnut. So that's the best field mark. Sometimes they can look quite robin-like, as this bird does. And I'll show you a picture from the back, which is also quite robin-like. And then you see this sort of robin-like color here, and you can get mixed up. But once again, even in this picture, which is kind of shadowed in the front part, you can see the bird is divided in half. The front half of the bird is different from the back half of the bird, at least on the underparts. Here's the bristles. You can see that again. Dark bill. There's another view. A hint of a wing bar here, but I just don't see that in the field. It's very plain. Say's phoebe. Here is the back view, and I'll tell you the story. John and I were out birding along the Phil, driving along the slough road, which you're not supposed to drive in, but sometimes we do that. I don't do it anymore, but I used to. And I was in a bad mood, and John said, "What's that bird over there?" And it's just a robin. He said, "That's not a robin." And sure enough, he turned, and it was a Say's phoebe. So he has never let me forget that. But you can see how robin-like it looks from the back, so don't be fooled like me. Oftentimes, with these phoebes and flycatchers, they'll be flipping their tail up and down. They like to do that. Robins will do that too, but usually not after they're done perching. So they'll perch on the top of a tree somewhere and flip their tail up and down a little bit, but then they seem to rest their tail. Whereas with these phoebes and flycatchers, they keep flipping it. Flicking it, I guess, would be a better word. Here's what it looks like in flight. You can see how plain the bird really is on for most of it. Say's phoebe. When they are hunting, they tend to stay kind of low. So that first picture I showed you was on a post that was probably about 4 feet high at the most. And that bird was on top of that post, and it would fly down toward the ground looking for an insect and catch its insect, and then oftentimes fly straight back to its first perch, but sometimes to another perch, but almost always very low. These are not birds that are going to be at the tippy top of a tree usually. If you don't see these in your bird counts in the spring, look for them in the fall. It's a little bit less common to see these in the fall, but they do come through here. But if you really want to see one for sure, the most reliable place I know of is the visitor center at Ginkgo State Park. There's been a Say's phoebe that nests in around the visitor center every year for a long time. All right, now we come to our to a bird that really has a flycatcher in its name. This is the olive-sided flycatcher. Very distinct bird. It's for a flycatcher, it's pretty good size. Not quite as big as a robin, but close. It's got this very flycatcher-like bill. It looks like a utility bill, but it's really quite broad on the base here. So this is a flycatcher bill, a scoop. Oftentimes with these olive-sided flycatchers, they like to hold their head feathers in a crest. They can flatten them if they want and have a rounded head, but they don't usually do that. Instead, they have this usually pointy head, not much of an eye ring, and then they've got this color of it's a sort of an ivory white. It's not spanking white most of the time, although in some lights it can look that way. That goes from under their chin all the way down to their undertail coverts, and in the part here by their breast and their belly, it gives a vest-like appearance. That is a diagnostic field mark for this bird. So notice the real color break here where you get this gray on one side and gray on the other, and then this distinct vest-like appearance, like they're too fat to be able to button their vests. So the vest is always open like that. That is diagnostic. Of course, another diagnostic for them is their song, and that's true for all of these flycatchers, especially the empedonics ones. So I'm going to play this song now. That's it. People say it sounds like quick 3 beers. But notice it doesn't string its song together. There's pauses, sometimes quite long pauses. So that's the olive-sided flycatcher song. Really quite beautiful. I love these flycatchers, by the way. Just great birds. Oftentimes they'll perch at the top of a tree, a bare tree most often, and look around for an insect to catch. And then when they see one, they'll fly out, and then oftentimes come back to the same high perch. Here's one that looks a little squattier, but you can see it's got the field mark, so very robust, almost crow-like bill. And then here we have the crest, which once again, this is due to the way it holds its feathers. So it can certainly put its feathers down if it wants to, but oftentimes does not. And then here we have that vest-like appearance from the chin all the way down to the undertail coverts. And you can see this distinct line here. So we'll be looking at other flycatchers that have a vest-like appearance, but nobody has this vest that is so distinct. This is a diagnostic field mark for olive-sided flycatcher, but it is not the only one. I'll show you another one pretty soon. So here's another view of one. This one here, you can see it looks a little bit whiter here than in the other pictures. I think that's an effect of the camera and the light. Here's another version of one. Now, oftentimes with the flycatchers, the underside of the lower mandible is key. So pay attention to that. But with these olive-sided flycatchers, there's so many other field marks, you don't really have to pay attention. So here's that vest again. And then notice the undertail coverts are kind of bulky. They look sort of pillowy, don't they? That's helpful also. Not all these flycatchers have that. Here's another view of one. Now we get the back here, and on the back it's quite plain, but what I want you to notice is right back here, you can just see a hint of it, a sort of oval of white. That's their undertail coverts that are coming up on the side there, and that is diagnostic. I'll show you a better picture in a minute, but here's one diving down, and you can see how pillowy the undertail coverts are. Here's that vest. Here. So here's a kind of oval of white that can be covered by some of the other feathers, but this, if you see it, it's usually present, especially if you wait for the bird to kind of move around and show you its back and so on. This is diagnostic. No other flycatcher has that. Here's another view of it. It's not, I guess not really undertail coverts. It's sort of fluffy under the tertials, but it's coupled with that sort of pillowy undertail coverts too, so you get this sort of oval of white. Here, even here on the side, you can kind of see that here. So if you see a good-sized flycatcher with a cresty head and a vest, look for this other field mark also. All right. So now we're going to come to another bird that looks a little bit similar. This is the western wood pewee, and you can see that it's a little bit reminiscent of the olive-sided flycatcher in that it has this cresty look, a little bit of a suggestion here of the vest, and that's what I meant when I said that some of these other flycatchers do have that. But notice that although it starts here with sort of dirty white and then kind of works its way down, it's kind of broken up by a little band here of color, and then it's just smudgy here. So it's only a hint of a vest, and it's kind of a yellow wash. It's not very ivory. And if you kind of imagine yourself thinking it's a vest, you can sort of talk yourself into it, but don't do that. Here's another view of a western wood pewee. And once again, you can see this one doesn't have as much of a wash of yellow on the under part of the vest here. And you can see that there's a hint of a vest, but it's just not as distinct. Let me go back to show you the distinction of that. You see here how much, it's almost like you could draw a line here on this olive-sided flycatcher. That is not the case with these western wood pewees. And of course, the song is completely different. So let's hear a song of a western wood pewee. So notice it's like almost like a question and response. The first part of the song is a little bit rising, and then it answers itself. People think the peewee, that first part sounds like peewee. So notice also that unlike the olive-sided flycatcher, the westernwood pewee song it repeats itself more often. There's not usually as much of a pause between one song and the next. Mind you, sometimes they will not do the whole song. They'll just say the pewee part, the first question, and they won't answer themselves. But usually they do. So it's a much smaller bird than the olive-sided flycatcher as well. So let's go back to full view here. So here's another one. You can see here how unvest-like that really looks. And the undertail coverts don't have that pillowy effect, and there's no white ovals on the back, and there's white wing bars that are, they don't really hit you in the face, but they're definitely present. Another thing to notice about these western wood pewees is no eye ring. Okay, so there's just a hint of a little bit of an eye ring there, but not much to speak of. So let's go back and look at some of these. See, no eye ring. Here's a little bit of an eye ring, but hardly there. Here, if you look really closely, you could say, I think I see an eye ring, but not really. Okay. So when it comes to these, this is not an Empedonyx flycatcher, which is a whole family of flycatchers that are very confusing. But in the field, these western wood pewees can make you think that it's an Empedonyx flycatcher. So I want you to notice these things. When you're looking at flycatchers of this particular family, so they're all kind of small, smaller than robins, definitely, bigger than finches. You want to notice the first the bill. We're always looking at the bill, and there's a distinction between whether the bill is altogether dark underneath or partially dark with sort of yellowish orangish, or all pale. And when they say pale, they mean orangish. So that's the first thing you look at. The next thing you look at is you look at whether there's an eye ring or not, and what the shape of the eye ring is. And then the next thing you look at is you look at the primary projections, what's happening with the wings and so on, and the wing bars. So we'll go through that in more detail in a minute. Here's another western wood pewee. This one looks like it's got a little bit more of an eye ring than I like, but not really. This one doesn't really have as much of a wing bars as you would like, but they they like to perch on a branch like this or a little stub, oftentimes in cover, and sometimes high, not at the tippy top, but certainly like maybe 40 or 50 feet up sometimes, depending on the habitat. And there they'll sit, and then when they see a bug, they'll fly out and catch it, and then oftentimes come back to the same perch. So another one. All right. Now, these are something that I want you to review, and you might want to try to do a screenshot or capture this and have it for your records. This was prepared by a guy named Birch, who did these wonderful illustrations. I think it's the best explanation of how to tell Empedonyx flycatchers apart from anything else I've seen. So we're not going to go through all of them because in the Neighborhood Bird Project we don't get them all, but we are going to do the Pacific Slope, the Dusky, the Hammonds, and the Willow. So those are the main ones that we get. The gray and the least are more eastern Washington birds, so we're not going to cover those in this class. So the first thing to look at is this. He's got a classification method here, starting with the bill. And we're not going to be concerned about the long bill because it's only the gray flycatcher. But notice the size of the bill here is medium-sized for most of these flycatchers that we're going to be dealing with. And look at the one that has the small one, which is our Hammonds. It's just a lot smaller. It's a dinky bill compared to a dusky flycatcher, which is its most similar cousin. So that's the first thing you do is look at the bill shape and size. Then you look at the lower mandible color, and here are the three different kinds. Here's mostly pale, sort of yellowish underneath, sometimes all the way to the tip, and then here's one that's partly orange and partly yellow, so all the way to the tip. Sometimes the tip can be a little bit dusky. And then the Hammonds, is mostly all dark. So in this picture here, you can see that it's dark to the tip, and then just right by the gape, it can be a little bit duskier, paler, but oftentimes with these birds, not so much. So there is variation in bill color. It can be a difficult thing to determine, but I want you to look at all of these birds anyway and do your best with it. As I say, there's individual variation, but it's still a very good field mark. So the Pacific Slope flycatcher has mostly or all orange-yellow under lower mandible color. The willow flycatcher is partly orange and partly yellow, so quite a lot of similarity here. And then the Hammonds is pretty much all dark. Now we come to the eye rings. So we start with a bill. We look at the bill shape and size first. Then we look at the lower mandible, the underside. And then we look at the eye rings. And the Pacific Slope flycatcher, this is diagnostic, has a teardrop-shaped eye ring. So more white on the backside and kind of coming to a point at the end. Almost a scowly look sometimes because there's not a whole lot of eye ring above the eye. That's what gives it the teardrop shape. And then we have what Birch calls the messy eye ring. It's sort of there and sort of not. So if you think about some of the westernwood peewee pictures I showed you, you could see that there's sometimes a little bit of a hint of an eye ring, but sort of mixed in with other colors of feathers. So that would be the Hammonds, the dusky for our purposes. And then an indistinct but present eye ring of white, kind of a narrow eye ring, that would be the willow and sometimes the dusky also. So check out the eye rings, especially this one. That's the most diagnostic. This wing panel contrast I don't see as a very good field mark, but basically what Birch has determined is that there's a difference between how much of a contrast there is between the wing bars and the rest of the wing, especially right under the wing bars. So in the least flycatcher, he notices that these wing bars are more distinct. They stand out. They seem like they're not whiter exactly, but just more. I guess you could say almost more white to them, at least in tone. And then more of a dark color beneath. And then with the other flycatchers, it's much more indistinct. I don't find that to be a good useful one, but you know what? This is a new one. Other people don't talk about this, so it might be something to pay attention to and figure out for ourselves. This one, though, is very important. This is the primary extension. So when a bird has its wings folded up, as you see here, um, the top layer of feathers right here, these are the tertials. These are the feathers that when the bird opens its wing are closest to its body. Beneath them, when they're all folded up like a fan here, are the primaries. So these are the parts of the wing that, if it were spread all the way out, would be the farthest most feathers outside of on the outer edge of the wing. They're the primary feathers, the primary flight feathers. So tertials close to the body, primaries farther away from the body, but folded up like this, the tertials are on top of the primaries. And the primary projection is the distance from where the tertials end to where the primaries end. And although this seems esoteric, this is the diagnostic difference between dusky flycatcher and Hammond's flycatcher. It's not the only one, but it's the best one. So here you can see the bill shape. The dusky is a little bit bigger, and the Hammond's is very dinky. And the bill color, the Hammond's is dark, and the dusky is paler. Those are all good field marks too, but the diagnostic one that's the best is to look at this primary projection. So here you can see it's pretty short with the dusky. There's not a whole lot of primary sticking out. There is some. You can look over here. Here's the difference here to here. But in the Hammonds, it's really long. So here's where the tertials end, and here's where the primaries end. So the primaries stick way out. That's the primary extension. The net effect of that is to make the Hammond's flycatcher tail look short compared to the dusky flycatcher, so the tail looks longer. It isn't really. The tails are about the same, maybe in the dusky a little bit longer, but not noticeably so. But because of the fact that the wing feathers stick down a lot more when the wings are folded up in the Hammonds, it tends to make visually the tail look shorter. That's not a good way to think of it, though, honestly. I get mixed up when I start thinking like that. I really do pay attention to where the tertials end and where the primaries end. So we're going to start with a willow flycatcher. Here's a good picture of one. Doesn't he look like a cheerful bird? Here you can see that big amount of scoop that from here all the way, you can imagine, onto the other side. It's a big scoop. Not a whole lot of field marks here, but we see with the willow that the lower mandible underside is pretty much yellow all the way to the end. Sometimes there can be a dusky tip here. Here's another view of one. So a little bit of an eye ring, but small, narrow. Yellow on the underbill here. Wing bars kind of indistinct, but very present. Willow flycatcher. So let's listen to one, which of course is distinct. Fitzbue. That's it. Okay, so that's the willow flycatcher. They do breed in western Washington. It's another view of one. Here's, you can see the underbill here is yellowish all the way to the end. There's the wing bars again. Back is pretty plain. So if it's not singing, don't give up. Check out the underside of the bill and the eye ring, as you see here. All right, here we have the Pacific slope flycatcher, so very distinct from all the other Empedonyx flycatchers. Oftentimes it has a cresty look, the way it holds its head feathers, but it doesn't have to. The underbill is pale, but look at this eye ring. You get that kind of scowly effect with a teardrop shape. And another thing about these Pacific slope flycatchers is they tend to have a wash of yellow. They're the yellowest of the Impedonyx flycatchers. That can vary a little bit depending on feather wear, but it's still a pretty good field mark. But this is a diagnostic field mark. You can see how yellow that is. And here's the underbill, yellow all the way out to the, or pale, I guess, all the way out to the end. Let's listen to Pacific slope flycatcher. So if you don't have hearing in the upper register, you're not going to hear this bird. It has a call and response also, but nothing like the westernwood peewee. It's much shorter. Doesn't always answer itself. Pacific slope flycatcher. There's another view of one. You can see that teardrop eye ring. And another one. It's the underside of the lower mandible. Here's the back. Even the back looks almost like orange crown color, doesn't it? Look at those bristles. And another one. Pacific slope flycatcher. Here's one that has lost its yellow wash, but the eye ring is still there. So these fall birds can look kind of brownish. All right, now we're coming to two flycatchers that are very similar. We're going to start with the Hammonds. And we see here that the Hammond's bill is small. This one doesn't show very dark underneath, and there is some variation with that. The eye ring can be what Bert calls messy, but in my experience, oftentimes there's more eye ring in the back here, but it's sort of circular. It's not the teardrop shape, so it looks almost like he's kind of opening his eyes like bug-eyed look, not scowly. But that can vary also a little bit. We get these wing bars here, but look at the primary extension. The primary extension is pretty long. Here, even here, you can see that primary extension coming way down. And here you see the underside of the bill is dark. Hammond's flycatcher. So Hammonds and Dusky are only present in western Washington, at least in our part of western Washington, in migration, mostly in the spring. The Dusky, in my view, tends to come a little bit earlier, but there is definitely overlap. Here you can see that eye ring. It doesn't really look like a teardrop. There might be a hint of a teardrop. We don't like the underside of that bill, do we? That's why it's not the best field mark. But look at this primary extension. Here's where the tertials end, and look at how far down these primaries go. That's the most diagnostic field mark to tell the Hammonds apart from the Dusky. And here again, you can see this long primary projection. Makes the tail, look at how short it makes the tail look. Dark underside of the bill. Dinky bill, too, for the size of the head. Let's hear what a Hammond's looks like, or sounds like. I'm going to play a Dusky right now so we can hear. So they're making the same call in a way, call and response. And there's a kind of crank at the end. but the dusky is higher pitched. Here's the Hammonds again. Hammonds and now dusky. It's when I say higher pitched, I mean more of the second part of the song. But honestly, I have a hard time telling those two apart. And in my master birder class, I could not do it. So I hope you're better at it than I am. And here we have that long primary projection again. And again, Hammond's Flycatcher. Okay, here's the dusky flycatcher, and you can see the bill is longer. It's not as dinky, and otherwise very similar. Same kind of messy eye-ring here, but look at the primary projection. Here's where the tertials end, and here's where the primaries end. So it's much, much shorter. Makes the tail look much longer. Here's another view of one. The underside of the lower mandible is paler. Remember, with most Hammonds, it was dark. And then here's the primary projection, very short, relatively speaking. So this is the dusky flycatcher. Here we don't like this bird at all, do we? The underside of the mandible is dark. We don't like that. We can't even see the primary projection. That's not helpful. Mostly what we're going by is the size of the bill on this one. This is better. So here you can see the pale bill, a little bit dark at the tip here, but certainly not all the way back to the gape. And then the primary projection is small. And here is another one, and you can see here's where the tertials end, here's where the primaries end. So Hammond's flycatcher, dusky flycatcher, what am I saying? Dusky flycatcher has the short one. Here you can really see that. Look at where the tertials end, and then the primaries. And another one. All right. That's the empedonics flycatchers and the flycatchers in total. So we do have more species that visit us, but we're not going to go into them because they would be very rare for here. We're going to get now into the tanagers. This is an easy bird to identify for both males and females in western Washington. The males are incredibly distinct. The females not so much in a way. And if you go to eastern Washington and look at female Bullock's orioles, you can get confused. And we sometimes get Bullock's orioles nesting in western Washington, but rarely. So I don't think I'm even going to go through that too much. But one way to tell them apart is the bill. So we start with the bill, and the bill on these tanagers is robust. It's a bit of a utility bill, but it's wide on the upper mandible and wide on the lower mandible. It's a very strong looking, robust bill, and a oriole bill it would be much, much thinner. The males are distinct. They've got these beautiful flaming red heads on the crown and then underneath on the chin as well. The amount of red on their heads in particular is sort of age related. The older males have more red. Sometimes the younger males don't have very much, and the first year males hardly have any. But then we go through the rest of the bird, black-backed, beautiful double wing bars of yellow on the breast all the way down to the undertail cover. It's really a very distinct bird. Here's a younger male. You can see not as much red on the head. Look at the robustness of that bill. And then the black back with these yellow wing bars here. Here's where the wings go. but when they open their wings up, you see the back is black, but then right behind the back, all the way down to the rump, it's this bright yellow. So Western Tanager. Here's one in flight. Isn't that just the most beautiful picture ever? Wow. Here's one flying, male flying. You can see the yellow goes to the underwing, at least for part of the way, but then the rest of the wing is very dark. Here's the female. So we start with the bill. This is coloration-wise, it's very similar to Bullock's Oriole female, but you start with the bill and you get this very robust tanager bill, and Bullock's Oriole bill would be much, much thinner. So that's the main difference here. Otherwise, quite yellow. Sometimes with the first-year males, and this one actually might be a first-year male, I don't think it is, but a little bit of hinted red there. But yellow on the head and the chin, and then yellow all the way down to the undertail coverts here. So just a kind of washed out looking, the female washed out looking compared to the male, but quite similar. There's another view of one. Western Tanager. I'm not going to play the song right now. I'll play the song in a little bit, because the songs of a Western Tanager and a robin and a black-headed grosbeak can sound quite similar. So I would start with the bill and notice these. It's a very distinct bill. Nobody else really has a bill like that. Here's a first-year male. You can see a little bit of hint of red coming out. Bill is kind of palish, but not totally dark. But once again, this bill color can be different depending on the individual. All right, here is the black-headed grosbeak. So this is more of an Eastern Washington breeder, but we certainly get them here, especially in spring migration, but also fall. The bill is distinct. Nobody else has a bill like this. It's called a grosbeak for obvious reasons. Look at the culmen, very curved. Not a whole lot of bill on the upper mandible compared to the lower mandible. It's almost like a parrot bill, very strong bill. Ordinarily, when you see a bill like this, it indicates that this bird has an amazing crushing ability for seeds. It's a seed eater. But we don't get that here. It doesn't eat like walnuts or anything like that. It's a seed eater, but it goes after the same kinds of seeds that purple finches do. I asked Dennis Paulson why that is. Why would this bird have this enormously big bill that looks like it could crush almost like a cement truck? And I asked him if it was because of what it eats when it's down in the neotropics, and he said he didn't know. So there you go. The males are distinct, black crown, black face, this beautiful kind of flaming orange nape and chin, and all the way down to the undertail coverts, which start to fade into a little bit of white there. If you'll notice, though, the belly is a different color. It's this sort of yellow color, so it looks like to me always like it's a bird on fire with embers. And then beautiful white wing bars, which are almost like stripes. And here you can see another view of one. The undertail coverts are really quite pale, almost white, so that don't be fooled with the previous picture. Here's what the back looks like. So you can see the crown stops, the black of the crown stops here, and then there's this big color break with this flaming orange, and then the back is a little bit stripy, and then there's sort of like the tanager. There's the back color ends here, and then the rest of them all the way down to the rump is this, once again, flaming orange color. White spots on the tail, white spots on the wings. Really quite a distinct bird. Female is a little bit difficult, not for most of us, most of the time, because she's got the same enormous bill, curved culmen, a lot more bill on the upper mandible than the lower. Unlike the male, though, she's got all these stripes, so central narrow white crown stripe, black, white, then a black face patch, and then white underneath. And kind of a streaky back. She's got the white on the wing bars as well, not as much as the male. And then she's got this beautiful, a little bit paler kind of orange color, a little bit of hint of yellow as with the male. And then these very narrow streaks here. So the only bird that you can confuse this with is a female rose-breasted grosbeak, which is an extreme rarity. We do get them now and then. They're very much an eastern United States bird. Rose-breasted grosbeak for males, and you can't mistake it. It's got the rose bright rose breast. But the female rose-breasted grosbeak can be very similar to the female black-headed grosbeak, which is our version of that bird. The difference is that the female rose-breasted grosbeak has much wider stripes here. These very, very thin streaks here for the female black-headed grosbeak are distinctive, so that's the difference. But you shouldn't have to worry about that because of the extreme rarity of the rose-breasted grosbeak. But I thought I'd point it out anyway. All right, so here's another view of when the juveniles look quite similar to the females. You can see that stripy look on the head. All right, so let's play all of these different songs here. Hang on a second while I do that. I find where they are. I think this is the one I want. Okay, first I'm going to play the robin. Okay, now I'm going to play the western tanager. Now I'm going to play the black-headed grosbeak. Okay, so let's run through those again and let's try to make up a little story about each one. Okay, so one thing to notice is all three of these songs are similar in tone, except that Western Tanagers is a bit rougher, kind of raspier sounding, but can be very, very similar. One thing to notice is the distinction in length of song, and then another thing to notice is whether it's going up and down on the scale a little bit. So with the American Robin, we notice that it goes up and down the scale a little bit. The song is long, and then after it's finished with its song, it's like it takes a breath. There's a little bit of a pause, and then it kind of starts in again. And then oftentimes it will throw in a kind of a chirpy noise, like a cheepy noise, I guess you could say, especially at the end of the song. So let's listen again to that. It does have it goes not up and down the scale exactly, but there's a difference in notes, but it's not you don't get the sense that it's asking itself a question and answering. Let's listen to the Western Tanager. Hear there's more of a cranky noise in there, and it oftentimes has that sort of question where it goes up like, huh? There it is. So that's quite different from the robin when you start paying that kind of attention. Let's do the black-headed grosbeak now. The bird books say that the black-headed grosbeak sort of sounds like a drunk robin. I've never understood that. The best I can make out of that is that it's a quicker song. Um, it just seems like more in a hurry. Not as drawn out. All right, so that's how you tell the differences. Okay, now we come to a bird that's a little bit unusual. I don't know how often you would see these on your bird counts in the spring and summer. They do. This is the lazuli bunting. Buntings are related to finches, but there's anatomical differences. Otherwise, they look very finch-like. I'll just point out that in Siberia, there's a lot more different species of buntings and not so many finches, and we kind of have the opposite, more finches and not so many buntings. This is the most common bunting. The other buntings we get are very unusual, so I'm not even going to talk about them too much. But this is the lazuli bunting male, a neotropical migrant, unmistakable. It's got this cerulean blue head. We call it lazuli. It's based on lapis lazuli, the ancient Egyptian favorite stone, kind of a turquoisey blue. Little bit of blue feathers mixed in the back, otherwise kind of a sort of a rusty, rich brown. And then this beautiful band of reddish brown across the breast, and then white under on the undertail cover and belly. I'll show you a better picture of that. And then these beautiful white wing bars here mixed in with blue feathers on the wings and tail. So here you get this very blue head, a distinct color difference here between this line of blue, and then you get this band of rusty brown. And then look at how white this is all the way down to the undertail cover. It's just a beautiful, little bit of a hint of a black mask if you look carefully. So this bird is unmistakable. Nobody else looks like this. Here's the back. You can see a little bit of rusty and blue mixed in there. Here are those big white patches here. Blue on the tail. Blue on the back too. Finch-like bill though, right? That's the bunting for you. And look at that in flight, just absolutely gorgeous. So this is, once again, more of an eastern Washington bird, but we see them here in the Seattle area in migration, and they have nested here sometimes. A little bit more common to see them nesting in open field areas, so farmlands a little bit. I suppose that's why they like eastern Washington more. But we have had nesting lazuli buntings at the Phil and elsewhere too, so you have to kind of pay attention to that. As I say, the males are unmistakable. And then let's see here if I think I have a lazuli bunting. Do I? Yeah, here's the song. It's a very pretty song, kind of delicate. It always strikes me as being kind of unfair that a bird would be so beautiful in appearance and beautiful song too. So that's the lazuli bunting. As I say, the males are well, could you mistake this for a western bluebird? I don't think so. I think what western bluebirds have very dark blue heads and backs, and so they're just more blue, and then the brown is reddish brown across the chest is darker. But the bills are completely different. This is a finch-like bill. That's the bunting for you. And bluebirds are more robin-like bills. So you shouldn't make that mistake. The females, here's another one in flight. The females are much harder to tell. We start with a bill, and we get this sort of finch-like bill again, but it's not very distinct. And then very plain on the face and the breast. No markings at all on the belly, all the way back to the undertail coverts. The back is sort of this yellowish, brownish color with just a little bit of striping, but that's not very helpful. She has the strong white patch that's like and folded up like that. Looks like a wing bar, and then a lesser wing bar below that. Um, but otherwise, it might be kind of hard to tell what kind of species she is, but she always has some blue feathers mixed in. So here, this one has blue around the eye a little bit, and then on the bend of the wing, you can see some blue, a little hint of blue on the tertials there, and blue on the tail. A very washed out male kind of looking. She's got this beautiful chest as well, but it's not as distinct as the male. And here in this particular version of one, it's hardly there at all. There's a bit of a color break, but it's very difficult to see. So when you see a very plain finch-like bird like this, no hint of any striping here whatsoever, which would put her outside of most of the finches that we get. But then start looking for any hint of blue. And here you see in the bend of the wing, especially some of the tertials and primaries, and then blue on the tail too. Here's an underview. So lazuli bunting female. You're not likely to see this female by herself. Most of the time she would be with the male, which would make your life a lot easier. But you should know these field marks for the female nevertheless. Look at that one. Oh my goodness. Oh, that would be tough. You would say, oh gosh, why is that not a winter American goldfinch? I mean, look at the head. It looks very goldfinchy, doesn't it? But of course, the goldfinch would have wing bars here and sort of zebra, black and white on the secondaries and tertials, and just a different kind of coloration altogether. And even in this pale bird, you see just a hint of blue back here and on the tail. And of course, we're looking at a summer bird. So these are neotropical migrants gone by the end of August, first part of September. Meanwhile, the goldfinches are still mostly in their breeding plumage. Here's the back of the female. You can see this blue here, especially in the tail. Lazuli bunting. Beautiful name, isn't it? Here you can see, like the male, she's got that broad white patch on the wings. I couldn't find a picture. No, I looked through hundreds and hundreds in the Macaulay archive of a female lazuli bunting in flight, and people, for whatever reason, the photographers weren't interested, so this is the best I could do. Here we have either a female or a juvenile. You can see just a hint of a wash of a band here, just a hint of blue on the tertials, and then on the tail. Lazuli bunting. All right. Here's one of our easier birds to distinguish. This is cedar waxwing. So these are year-round birds. They are peripatetic in the wintertime, which means that they get together in flocks and they fly around looking for fruit to eat. They're fructivores, although they will eat insects sometimes also. But they get into these big flocks in the wintertime and look around for fruit, and then they'll eat berries and rotten crab apples and stuff like that. So usually if you see, especially in wintertime, if you see one cedar waxwing, you're going to see more than one. These birds to me always look like they're wearing super suits. They're so smooth on their feathers. It's just gorgeous. So let's take a look at the field marks of males and females, quite similar. Start with the bill, utility bill here, insectivore, but also fructivore. Black mask on the face here down to where the bill is, surrounded by white. And I'll show you a better picture of that. So there's a thin line of white here. That is diagnostic, so pay attention to that. Kind of this rusty brownish beigey color, a crest, which this one is holding down, very smooth, same color on the face, down to the breast, which gradually kind of turns into this yellow. I'll show you. So here we have another view of one. Look how smooth that is. My goodness. Here's that white outline above the black mask, diagnostic. Here's the crest held up, most of the time held up, but it can flatten it like I showed you in the previous picture. Not too much to go on in terms of actual markings from the chin all the way down to the yellow undertail cover. Well, not I should say yellow belly, white undertail coverts. That's diagnostic. And then on the wings, very plain wings, except these little kind of projections here. That's what they're sort of waxy, and that's what gives it its name, waxwing. But no wing bars to speak of, and then very plain rump, and then yellow band at the end of the tail here. So here we have another view of one. So we start with the bill, black mask outlined in white. They're very plain face all the way down, yellow on the belly, white undertail cover. It's diagnostic. Pay attention to that. Also, the wings are have very little white in them. A little bit of white on this edge here, but otherwise no white in this part at all. That's something to pay attention to too, because there's only one bird that you're going to make a mistake with on this one, and that's the Bohemian waxwing, which is very rare in Western Washington, but occasionally shows up. I've never seen a Bohemian waxwing at the Phil. I live for the day when one will come, but Magnuson Park gets them. Here's what one looks like in flight. You can see these waxy projections, the red projections here, but nothing going on with the wings. Here's that little bit of white that I showed you on the wing before. And then oftentimes they look like robins in flight sometimes, especially if in bad light. But this yellow band on the tail shows up in almost all light, so that's something to look for. The juveniles look quite different from the grown-ups. They have that black mask too, outlined in white, but they're very stripy on the underparts, so that's quite different. Here is the Bohemian waxwing. So the only reason I'm showing you this is because if you ever see one at Montlake Phil, you have to call me right away. And I wanted to tell you the distinctions, even though you're not going to see these on most of your counts. It would be an extreme rarity, but still you should know. So the Bohemian waxwing is a bigger bird, noticeably bigger, but of course you can't tell that if that's all you're looking at. But it's got this beautiful kind of wash of warm brown across the forehead here, and no trace of white on the outline of the mask. So that's diagnostic. And then going on down the rest of the bird, you see the wings are quite different. They've got a white wing bar and quite a bit of white over here. And then another distinction. Well, let's look at the faces here first. So left is the cedar waxwing, and you can see this white outline of the mask, which is not present, especially above on the top part of the mask on the Bohemian waxwing on the right. But then this wash of warm brown on the Bohemian waxwing, which does not show up on the cedar waxwing at all. Here is another diagnostic field mark difference. This is the easiest one to see, although the face is something you should pay attention to. White undertail coverts for the cedar waxwing on the left, and warm brown undertail coverts for the Bohemian waxwing on the right. Diagnostic. But look, the wings are also different for the cedar waxwing. A lot more white on the wing and not much white here. Here's another picture to show you side by side. So there's this little bit of like stripy white on the wing of the cedar waxwing, but that's all the white you see. Whereas with the cedar wax, or the Bohemian waxwing rather, you get a white patch kind of above the wing here, and then a big white patch above these the waxy red things. Also more white here on the primaries. So different bird. All right, now we're going to get into the pigeons. Mostly what I'm going to show you on these distinctions is flying pigeons, because the pigeons on a wire are pretty easy to tell apart. We'll start with the rock pigeon, which sometimes used to be called rock dove, but now I think it's back to be called rock pigeon. So this is a non-native bird, and it's very, very popular with pigeon fanciers. So the net result of that is that the coloration of these rock pigeons can be highly variable. But if you're looking at more of the wild types, they have this sort of lumpy thing on their bills here, which can be a different color. Very pigeon shape, a sort of a dinky bill for the size of its head, broad forehead, which makes it look smart, but I always think of these as kind of dumb birds. I don't know why, I must be prejudiced. Grayish head, and then iridescent greenish, purplish on the neck. And then the back is usually a pale gray, and the wings have these dramatic black stripes on them, grayish to whitish rump. There's a couple of them, and see that kind of lumpy thing on their on their bills there. So here you see a bit of a color variation. This is the male on the right, and he doesn't have the black wing marks here that the female does. He's darker altogether. Look, his breast goes down a lot farther, but that's not the only color variation. I'll show you another bit. Here's the female walking away from the male who's got himself all puffed up because he's trying to attract her. But you can see how different she looks, and that difference can be huge. Because of all the breeding and then the releasing into the wild and so on. So here's a dark one. You don't get the light belly or anything. Here's a brown and white one. Sometimes some of these rock pigeons can look almost entirely white. Here's one. So color is not going to help you very much with these, at least when they're walking around like this. But notice with all of these birds, they've got that kind of lumpy growth on the top of their bill. The other pigeons that I'm going to show you don't have that. Here's what we might call a native rock pigeon in flight. So here you can see, even in flight, they've got that sort of lumpy thing on their above their bill there. And then grayish head, iridescent neck and breast. And then very pale gray on the wings. You can see here the two dramatic black wing bars, I guess you could call them, pale rump. But notice the tail here. The tail has a band at the end that's at the very tip of the end of the tail. Here's one that's got a little bit more of a whitish rump. This whitish rump can show up at a great distance. Even if it's pale gray, it still looks kind of white when it's flying like this. And then notice the tail. These tails are very important. So dark trailing edge on the tail. Here you can see even this one, which is colored a little bit differently. It has that dark trailing edge on the tail. And then the other, that's diagnostic. The other diagnostic thing to look at on these flying pigeons, and I'm mostly showing you flying because most of the ones you're going to see outside of the rock doves anyway, which you'll see on the ground, I guess, in some of the parks. But a lot of times all you're going to see are flying pigeons. And I want you to be able to tell what they look like, the three different species that I'll be showing you, three or four. Four species, sorry. So the rock pigeons have this sort of silvery underwing. That it looks almost silvery, and here it's showing up white, but in light it looks it's got a silvery tone to it, a whitish silvery tone, and trailing edge all the way across the wing, dark. And here's the trailing edge on the tail also. So here's one taking off, and you can see the dark trailing edge on the underside of the wing. Here's that sort of silvery color. Diagnostic. Here's even the tail, broad band on the trailing edge of the tail. Trailing edge of the tail. All right, here is our native pigeon, the band-tailed pigeon. This is a forest bird. It's the biggest pigeon. It's got a yellow bill with a little bit of a black tip. You notice it doesn't have that lumpy growth on the above the bill there. Sort of a dove gray head, and then white on the nape, and then iridescent, could be kind of greenish or purplish on the nape going down to the where the back starts here. The front is a kind of pale grayish, dovish color, grayish, brownish, reddish. And then here you see the band on the tail that gives it its name. And notice this band is dark, but it is not the trailing edge. Here you can just see a hint of it right here. I'll show you that in another picture. So once again, black tip, bill, yellow, and then this dove gray on the head, going down the breast and belly. It gets a kind of a rose tone to it, white undertail coverts, white collar, half collar, I should say, here with iridescent feathers. Here's what one looks like from the front. Here's one lifting its wings. Now this one, that is a mourning dove. Why do I have that picture here? I don't know. We'll come back to mourning dove pretty soon. So here's the back, the straight tail. Unlike the mourning dove and unlike the Eurasian collar dove, which I'll show you, it's a broad, straight tail, sort of like a crow tail, I guess you could say, the way it ends. But here's the diagnostic band. But notice the dark band is not the trailing edge. Here's one in flight. All right. Now this is an important picture. I looked hard for a picture like this because a lot of times when you see these band-tailed pigeons flying, they look dark underneath, and almost all the pictures that I found showed that the wings were dark, almost black. That is not really true. If we go back to this picture here of the lifting of the wings, it's really kind of a pale gray and then a little bit darker color on the primaries. And you can see that here. Pale gray here and then a little bit darker. And then the undercarriage can look quite dark in light also, but it's more of a rosy gray color. So you have to be a little bit careful with these gray colors of birds that are so dependent on the ambient light. That gray color it can pick up the ambient light and look very, very different. It can look almost black. It can look rose like this. It can look dark gray. It's kind of hard to characterize it as any color at all. This is the only picture I could find that really shows the true color. But even in flight, you can see the black tip on the bill, yellow, and then this white half color followed by iridescent iridescent feathers on the nape. This is the darkest overall pigeon in flight, even though it isn't really dark. But remember when we were showing the rock pigeon, the silvery underwings, and this is not silvery. It can be a palish gray, but not silvery. Always darker on the primaries and the trailing edge. And when it spreads its tail out, you can see the trailing edge is pale. Here's the dark band, kind of halfway up the tail. So here you can see this picture, the underwings look darker. And oftentimes in light, they do look darker. So when they're flying away from you, look for the tail. If the tail is all folded up, like this one, not going to help you very much. Then what you want to look at is the overall darkness of the underwings compared to a rock pigeon. Another band-tailed pigeon picture. All right, here's a Eurasian collared dove. So this is new to our state, basically. This is a released cage bird that started breeding first in Florida, but there are also some in Southern California, and they've gradually made their way up to Washington. They've become quite common in farmlands in both eastern and especially western Washington, and they're getting to be a little bit more common here in the urban areas too. So dark bill, very pale on the head, much paler than the other pigeons. Here's the where it gets its name, Eurasian collared dove. Here's the black collar, a little bit of a black on the leading edge, not a good field mark. Very pale kind of dove brown, I guess you could say. This is the palest dove. Here you can see a couple of them. They have long tails, and often they hold their tails together like this in a point when they're flying. So that's something to pay attention to. Here's the collar. So very different collar from the band-tailed pigeon, if you'll recall. The band-tailed pigeon had white and then iridescent. This doesn't have any iridescence, just this little bit of a black collar there. Notice the face is very plain, no marks on it whatsoever. The back is very plain, the wings are very plain. That will help you distinguish this from a similar dove, which is the mourning dove. Here's what the front looks like, palest dove. Here's the back. Really has a square kind of tip to the tail, but it can hold itself to look very pointy. When it's flying like this, you can see it has a trailing edge of white with brown feathers going down the center and then black on either side. But the shape of the tail is straight all across here. So when it folds it up, it looks pointy, but when it spreads it out, you can see it's really blunt like this, square ended. Here's what it looks like underneath, and you can see how pale it is overall. And here you can see it's not a black band, it's black all the way to where the tail joins the rump, trailing edge of white. Okay, so here is the mourning dove, which looks quite similar to the Eurasian collared dove, but look at the difference. There's no collar. Oh, no collar. It has a little bit of black right here on its face and then black spots on the wings. Those are all quite different from the Eurasian collared dove, if you recall. Here's what one looks like perched. And here is the back. The tail is distinct, but it's hard to tell when it's folded up like this. So pointy tail, but a lot of white. And I've got a picture here. Where is it? Here it is. Okay, so you can see that it's diamond shape. That's diagnostic for mourning dove, and the color is very similar to the Eurasian. So a lot of black here and then trailing edge of white. But if you have this diamond shape, that's diagnostic for mourning doves. And recall that the Eurasian collared dove would have straight edge here, otherwise quite similar in flight. So going back here, the top part, though, is different. You can see just a little bit of black here, like a little tiny smile, no collar, and black spots on the wings, not many, but some. And it's darker brown, too. So this is, it's a pale dove, but not nearly as pale as the Eurasian collared dove. But you're not going to see you might see this when it's on the ground. That's certainly possible. It would be hard to see this view because you're mostly looking under the bird. So that's what you want to look at, under the bird. So here's two of these paler doves together. We have on the left the mourning dove. You can see the tail is very pointy. Spots on the wings and a little bit on the back. A little bit of black here right under the eye, but no collar. Here you see the Eurasian collared dove on the right, very plain face, much paler brown than any of the other doves. Black collar, no spots on the wings or the back, and square shaped tail, but it doesn't always hold itself like that. It's hard to tell. So that's the difference. Okay, this is, I think, the last bird that we'll be covering tonight, and this is, we'll get to the shrikes. So we have two shrikes. And they kind of change places. One is a northern shrike and the other is the loggerhead shrike. We're going to do the northern shrike first. This is a north breeding bird. They breed in Alaska and they come down to us in the wintertime. They think of us as the balmy south. It's a songbird, definitely, but it's an unusual songbird in that it is a predator. It's a meat eater. So it's got this big hooked bill. Unlike the raptors, though, it doesn't catch its prey with its feet. It has little robin-like feet. It catches its prey with its bill. The prey that it catches are things like small lizards, crickets, grasshoppers, and voles. So it's definitely a predator, and that's why it has this big hooked bill here. So the loggerhead shrike and the northern shrike are very similar, difficult to tell apart. I'll take you through some of the field marks so you can tell, but there's not a whole lot of overlap in when they come to us. So the northern shrike is a late fall to winter bird. The loggerhead shrike is a neotropical migrant, so it doesn't get here until mid-April or even into May. I'd say probably May, a little bit more common then. And it's not a Western Washington bird. It's unusual in Western Washington. It's much more common in Eastern Washington. So the loggerhead shrike would be an unusual bird, but you should know the difference anyway. So we'll start here with the bill on the northern shrike. The bill sticks out a little bit more, but that can be very hard to see. This is the best field mark for telling the two birds apart, this black mask. So you see here that the black mask of the northern shrike does not quite come above the eye. So it looks like it's about to go above the eye, but then it quits. And so the most of it is right below the eye or at level with the eye. That's the diagnostic field mark. There are other diagnostic field marks, namely the gray color of the overall head and back is much paler in the northern shrike than in the loggerhead shrike, but that can be very hard to see. Once again, with these gray colors, they are dependent on ambient light to a very large extent. So otherwise, beautiful bird, really. White on the all the underparts, black on the tail. It's let me show you one in flight just to see how gorgeous. Yeah, look at that. Wow. So in flight, it's got this beautiful strip of white here on the wing, white rump, but that's true for loggerheads as well as northern shrike. So it's not a diagnostic for those two species, but it's just beautiful. So let's go back here. Okay, here's the face of the northern shrike. Bill sticks way out like this. You can see the black of this mask does not go above the eye. Maybe just a little bit of feathers there, but not really. And then behind the eye, it's well below the eye. Um, Oftentimes they'll have this kind of little bit of scalloping look on their breasts and bellies. That can be hard to see. Look at how pale the crown and back are. You can see how much this sticks out in front here. Here's the mask below the eye, especially behind the eye. And then here, this one is showing a lot more of that scallopy look on the front parts. Here's one that it looks sort of blocky, and that's that you could say that those are more like loggerhead characteristics to look sort of chunky compared to the more stretched out northern shrike. I sometimes think the northern shrike, if you grabbed it by the tail and by the bill and pulled, you'd get that sort of stretched out look a little bit. But these northern shrikes can look blocky too, as this one does. And you're not going to do much with the bill here, but look at this mask. It's definitely below the eye. Here's another view of beautiful bird, really. And in flight again. Okay, so here is the loggerhead shrike. And you can see the bill is pushed in. It doesn't stretch out as much. Here's the same mask. And it looks the same in the front part of the eye, and above the eye it looks like, well, yeah, that's kind of similar too. But look behind the eye and see how wide this mask is here. Compared to the northern shrike. Gray is a lot darker. It doesn't show up in this picture very much. Bird looks blockier, as I said, but that's not a good field mark. So here's a good picture of the face with that mask, and here's another one. I think I have two of them together, but let's look at these singly for a while. So here you can see the black is wider than the eye. The dark gray of the head and back is a little bit darker. Here you can really see that on this bird. Here are two of them together. So on the left we have the northern shrike. Bill is a little bit more stretched out. Once again, that could be a little bit hard to see in the field, but that's a good mark. And then the black mask here is definitely lower than the eye, like almost halfway up to the eye, whereas in the loggerhead shrike on the right, it's wider than the eye. You can see that here. Now you can also see the difference in the two gray colors. Darker loggerhead, lighter on the northern shrike. Oh, yeah, this is a little bit out of sequence. So here are the pigeons underneath. I just thought this would be a useful thing to look at. So we start with the rock pigeon here. You can see the silvery wing linings of the underwings, trailing edge of dark, and then dark on the tail. The whole tail here looks dark, but really it's like a very heavy band of dark. It can look lighter as the tail gets closer to the body, but not a band look at all. Here is the band-tailed pigeon with the tail spread out. And here you can see the wings, the underwings look dark. I included this picture. This is another band-tailed pigeon, so you can see what a truer color it is in good light. But in most light, it's going to look, these underwings are going to look the darkest of all the pigeons. Take a look at that and compare them across all four of these. This is by far the darkest. Here is the band tail that gives it its name. And you can see it's not a trailing edge of dark at all. It's kind of halfway up the tail. The trailing edge is actually white, but there's a distinct band. And then mostly when you see these birds, you can see this little bit of white here on the collar. Then next to it, we have the Eurasian collared dove, and you can see the wings are very pale underneath. There's no trailing edge of dark as there is with the rock pigeon. You can see the collar here. Usually in most light you can. It's the palest of all of our pigeons. The tail is completely different from any of the other pigeons that I've shown you so far. So black on the nearest the body, white trailing edge. Well, we've got a white trailing edge here too, but look, there's a distinct band on the band-tailed pigeon, which does not exist on the Eurasian collared dove, and is completely different from the rock pigeon on the far left. And then the main bird that you would mix up with the Eurasian collared dove is the mourning dove. And here you can see the difference here. Once again, the wings are quite similar, a little bit darker with the mourning dove, darker body. It's still very pale, but distinctly darker than the Eurasian collared dove. The tail color is quite similar. You see dark near the body and a white trailing edge, but look at the tail shape, completely different, and these long trailing feathers here. So it's a completely different shape of the tail. And that's my last picture for the night, so I'm going to stop sharing and I'll take questions.
Oh my gosh, Connie, that was Ripley's Believe It or Not. Heroic, heroic. There was only one question that was posed, and it was about what do scrub jays eat, and I pasted into the chat an answer. They eat everything. But anyone else have questions? Our great leader seems to have a little energy left. Amazing.
We have, scrub jays will eat crickets and other insects. They'll eat fruit. They like acorns. They're very fond of peanuts. If people like to feed peanuts, I think that's what attracts them to Ballard. Ballard people put out a lot of peanuts. I'm so jealous. I want them to be at the Ville.
We can put a little line of peanuts from Ballard all the way to the Motley Phil for you.
There was a pair of California scrub jays last year that attempted to nest at the Phil. That would be a Phil record, but I don't believe they succeeded. So maybe they'll try again this year. I hope so. Beautiful bird, really. So yeah, so our last class is going to be our makeup class for owls and raptors. We'll do that next week, and then I think what we're going to do is we'll have one session after that, which has not been scheduled yet, but we'll get on that pretty soon. Of a test for the owls and raptors, so that every one of these classes will end up with a test. And I think what we're going to do then is we'll just the very last class, which is not next week, but perhaps the week after that, we'll just do all tests. So we'll have a test of owls and raptors, but then I'll throw in other tests too. It'll be like a grand master test, which should be a lot of fun. And John insists on playing bird calls that sound alike, which include things like merlins and Cooper's hawks and jays and woodpeckers and so on. So practice your calls too, and we'll throw that one in as well.
Fantastic, inspiring, and sleep well.
All right. Well, hope to see you next week.
Night all.
Thanks, Connie.
Good night. Thanks for sharing.